guys, it's Dave. Welcome back to another video. Hope you're having a good week. I know Rocket Lab stock definitely is. We're up in the fives, lots of fun. I'm in the green on it fairly significantly now, so fun to see that after being down in the red for quite a while. Hope you're enjoying it too. Today I wanted to talk about an interesting piece of news that I came across on Twitter. You may not have noticed it. It's kind of flying under the radar a little bit about relativity space. And it's about this tweet from Michael Sheets, a journalist reporter for CNBC who also covers the space industry. And it really comes down to Relativity's costing of their new Terran-R rocket and how it compares to Rocket Lab's Neutron and really just the entire field, and has me really confused. So let's dive into that. But before we do, if you haven't subscribed already, please do. Every subscriber really helps out the channel. Every comment and like also helps out with the algorithm. All right, so with that out of the way, here is the tweet from Michael Sheets, basically saying that Jefferies analysts who cover, a lot of private and public companies had a meeting with Relativity leadership and noted that the Terran-R rocket has an implied price of $55 million per launch. Although early customers did sign at a discount for $45 million. This is something, by the way, Rocket Lab has been reluctant to do. They haven't wanted to sign these early contracts because they would have to discount the cost of their Neutron rocket, something they'd rather not do. Apparently, they'd rather charge full price, so they're not going to give out discounts for these way early launches, signing contracts before the rocket is even ready. Anyway, that's not really the point of the video. The point is the $55 million per launch cost. Now, on the face of it, this might not seem too unreasonable, but let's dive a little deeper and talk about why I think this is actually pretty wild and has me really confused, to be honest. And I didn't want to be negative about Relativity. I actually really like their CEO, Tim Ellis. He's kind of a nerd after my own heart in a lot of ways, named their 3D printing technology after StarCraft, the old school video game I used to love in my childhood. And he just seems like a really cool guy doing things for the right reasons, talking about going to Mars as well. And, seems really interesting, but they've done a lot of things over the past few years that kind of have me shaking my head and make me think they're really just kind of not in touch with reality, unfortunately. I think we all know they used to talk about 3D printing their entire rocket, including the massive structures, huge tanks, and according to Chamath Palihapitiya, who I'm also not as big a fan of these days, he claimed that was going to 10x reduce the cost of building out rockets. Well, turns out that's not the case, because they've now announced they're no longer going to be 3D printing all these big tanks and only certain components. Now, their 3D printing technology, I'm sure, is quite impressive, but they're going back to traditional manufacturing techniques for a lot of the components of their next-gen Terran-R rocket. In addition to that, they've been working on a Terran-1 rocket for many years, claimed they had a massive backlog for this rocket, and billions of dollars of contracts ready to go once they finally launched. They did do a test launch. They got out of Earth's atmosphere, had a failure with their second stage, and promptly canceled the entire rocket. If they really did have all these massive contracts for Terran-1, why are you just canceling this rocket after what many people considered to be a pretty successful launch? You know, it didn't blow up on the pad. It got through max Q. So what's going on there? Why would they completely cancel that rocket? A lot of head scratchers for me anyway. But back to the launch cost and how it's going to shape the industry. If we dive into this cost a little bit deeper and look, put it in perspective, we have a 23,500 kilogram to low Earth orbit downrange landing for their next-gen Terran-R rocket. They're charging $55 million per launch. That would come to a cost per kilogram of $2,340. Now, without having that in perspective, it's hard to say whether that's cheap or not, but let's look at Neutron here. Neutron, a rocket coming from a more mature company that has launched many times before and really is the swing of launching regularly. will be pricing their launches at $50 million per launch for 13,000 kilograms, and that will come in at $3,846 per kilogram. Obviously, much more expensive than the $2,340 cost per kilogram that Relativity is quoting. A company that has never successfully launched a rocket, never mind, launch regularly on an ongoing basis to get a good idea of all the costs involved, ground infrastructure, landing barges, all the employees, all this stuff has to go into the costs. So the fact that Relativity is going to undercut Neutron by, probably over 30% on a cost per kilogram basis is pretty mind-boggling to me, especially when we looked at all the optimizations Neutron has done in order to get the reusability to reuse the most percentage of the rocket possible and really drive down the costs, including their launch infrastructure, not having a launch tower, fueling up the rocket from below. All these optimizations that I've gone over in a previous video. If you haven't seen my Neutron video, I do recommend you check it out. I'll link it in the description below. But basically, a more mature company, which is Rocket Lab, which is launched incredibly regularly, is saying they can get the cost down to $3,846 per kilogram. A company that's never launched successfully is now saying they're going to do $2,340 per kilogram. What's the deal here? Well, let's compare this to Falcon 9. So Falcon 9 is the current leader. They have an absolutely unprecedented launch cadence, which allows them to have scale, which allows them to amortize launches and all that infrastructure and equipment, including barges, ground equipment, all the rest. They amortize the cost of that across many more Falcon 9 launches, giving them the ability to really reduce cost. They're currently launching at $67 million per launch. The payload with a downrange landing on that is 17,200 kilograms, a little bit less than what Relativity's Terran-R says they're going to be able to launch, but still significantly more than a Neutron. The cost per kilogram for this comes in at $3,895 for the Falcon 9, which is slightly higher than the Neutron and way higher than, again, the Terran-R from Relativity. So Relativity says they're going to massively undercut both these rockets, the current leader and the up-and-coming Neutron. As well, Relativity is not doing any space systems, not making their own satellites. All of their revenue has to come from launch, at least to this point. They have a large valuation to support, so they need to be able to make a ton of money in order to support that valuation and really justify the size of the company for investors, and they only have launch to do it. They don't have the luxury of SpaceX or Rocket Lab. SpaceX with their Starlink constellation, Rocket Lab with their space systems, and soon to be space applications. Relativity, right now at least, is a pure launch play, so they don't have that diversity going for them. So, further perspective for these launch costs. We do know that Rocket Lab have said they're planning for about a 50% gross margin on the Neutron, launching for $50 million. That means the cost for Rocket Lab to launch Neutron, once they scale up, should be about $25 million. To hit that same cost per kilogram rate of around 2,340, Neutron would have to change their launch cost to about $30 million. That means Neutron would only be making $5 million per launch. You just can't really run a business like that. $5 million per launch on a massive rocket you're investing millions and millions of dollars into. Maybe you can do it if you're making the money on another side of your business, like you're launching at cost your own satellites and then you're making revenue from your own satellites. But that would drive your margins so far down. You just can't justify the other operations of the business. You can't turn a profit like that. So really confusing to see the gross margins being driven so far down. It just doesn't make sense, at least to me. And then looking at Falcon 9, okay, yes, their current launch cost is $67 million, but we know no one's really pushing them on that. They don't really have much in the way of competition when it comes to semi-reusable launch vehicles. So they can kind of charge whatever they want as long as it's under the, the cost of these fully expendable old school vehicles, meaning they could probably come down in cost a bit and still have, say, a 50% gross margin. The internal claim by some SpaceX employees is that they can launch this thing all in for $28 million, which is actually quite impressive if you ask me. But again, that brings into account their current market leadership. They absolutely insane rate of launch they have, able to amortize their costs across so many different launches. They say they can do it about $28 million per launch. To maintain a 50% gross margin, the most they could launch their Falcon rocket for would be $56 million. That would bring their cost per kilogram in at $3,255 per kilogram. Still well above what Relativity is saying they're offering. So the only way I see this as really being possible is that Relativity is willing to cut their gross margins well below 50%, well below that target that Rocket Lab is shooting for, and yet somehow they're still going to maintain being a massive business doing only launch with a much lower gross margin. The only way they could do that is if they scale to an extremely insane cadence, even above what the Falcon 9 is currently. That'll take a long time. Relativity has been burning a ton of cash in order to develop their next-gen rocket. They put a lot of money and time into Terran-R, which they just decided to cancel after making no money on it. So in order to get to a launch rate that massive, I think they would need to raise a ton more money. And it's just not making sense to me that they think they can, turn a massive profit and make it worthwhile all on launch with a lower gross margin. They've never launched a rocket successfully before, and they're just going to come in and undercut everybody who's ever done it before. They've given up on some of their wild claims of the past. So yeah, just really, this doesn't make any sense to me. And then you have to ask yourself as a Rocket Lab investor, okay, if Relativity really can do that, are you scared? Are you worried that they're going to drive Neutron out of business before Neutron even launches? If they can hit this cost per kilogram rate of way lower than what Neutron's hitting. So I've weighed all these facts today and just thought about it in my own mind. And what I have to say is I think I have to believe in Rocket Lab's leadership and track record way more than I do Relativity's leadership and track record. Rocket Lab obviously having that history of launching rockets, that history of success, and Relativity so far has the history of canceling their one and only rocket, walking back on saying they're going for full reusability, including their second stage, walking back on saying they're going to additively manufacture their tanks, their rocket body, just walking back a lot of their wild claims, a lot of what made them exciting in the first place. So weighing all these things, I think my money is still on Rocket Lab, and that I think, in my mind, Relativity just doesn't have a really good understanding of the cost of doing these things on an ongoing basis. They probably think theoretically they can hit these targets, but I have a feeling when push comes to shove, when they finally start launching, when they encounter problems they need to spend money to fix, they'll realize they have to spend a lot more than this to launch their rocket successfully. So I think Relativity really needs to come back to Earth here and realize that a lot of their wild claims are really just not feasible. Meanwhile, Rocket Lab has said from the beginning they're not going to be reusing the second stage of their vehicle, and turns out, that was a smart move because it's actually a lot harder than people have thought. And Relativity has realized that as well. They just can't do it. So Rocket Lab on the one side, kind of standing firm, doing what they promise and delivering on their promises. Relativity on the other side have made a lot of wild promises that they end up having to walk back on. I think I am still comfortable with where my money is, but I will be keeping an eye on Relativity's Terran-R and seeing how they can help shape the future of the launch industry for years to come. Tell me what you think down in the comments below. Do you agree with me? Do you think Relativity is just out to lunch with these prices, or are they actually going to hit these marks and really drive down the cost per kilogram for the entire industry and cause others to have to lower their prices significantly? I'll continue the discussion with you in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one. Have a great week. Bye for now.